Hey there, my name is Jared, and welcome to the Jared Show Wisdom Podcast. In this episode, we'll take a look at the difference between the brain and the mind. How are they different, and how they work together, and how it affects our lives. The brain and the mind. These are another couple of terms that seem to be used the same and are tossed around as if there's no difference. This is an easy mistake to make. Knowing the difference between the brain and the mind can help us all with memory, bad habits, creating new good habits, self-confidence, and much more. In part 1, we'll start with a standard definition of the brain, and then journey deeper into the inner workings of how one of the most important organs in our body operates. In part 2, we'll take a look at the mind. What is the mind? Where is the mind? How does it work? And in the last part, we'll compare the two to see the differences and how this realization can help us in our everyday lives. Before we go to break, I'd like to ask, what exactly does your brain do? How does it work? We'll get into the answer when we come back. Welcome back. So what is the brain? How does it work? If you look it up, you most likely find this definition. It's a noun, and the first one would be an organ of soft nervous tissue contained in the skull of vertebrates, functioning as the coordinating center of sensation and intellectual and nervous activity. Number 2 would be intellectual capacity. An example of that is, I didn't have enough brains for the science. Or I don't have enough brains for sciences. But let's get a little bit deeper into the meaning. So, if you listen to the other episodes, namely episode 2, you have heard the difference between perception and perspective. And basically what we're doing with this episode is we're going a little bit deeper. If you haven't heard that, you can either go listen to it, or you can skip it if you like and just continue with this episode. But basically what we went over in the second episode of this podcast is perception is out there and it comes in, goes into your brain, and perspective is something that comes from inside and goes out. And that would be the mind, basically. This perception and perspective, they come from a system of concepts or a system of understanding. And those concepts are made up of ideas. And ideas are made up of groupings of thought, if you will. So these thoughts are like the electricity in the machine. And we'll get into that a little bit deeper a little bit later. But basically thoughts are the things that power the system. Here's a better way to look at things. We get a better understanding of this with, let's say, basic biology or science. So think how science explains things. We are in the middle, always, or in the present of life, right? And we're always in the middle of everything. I'll probably end up doing a whole podcast about that because it's an interesting concept. But we're always in the middle of something. So with present, you have the past, and the past is behind us, and the future is ahead of us. So we're in the middle. When we try to explain the body and how it works, scientists focus on getting smaller and deeper into what makes up the body, and eventually you get to cells that form the body. So you got smaller, right? When trying to explain what makes up the physical plane of existence, which is around us, science again gets smaller and deeper, and you eventually get to molecules and atoms, right? And it actually goes much, much further than molecules and atoms. But we'll save the deep theories and the wild findings of the quantum world for another time. That's going to be a fun podcast, but not at the moment. Right now, we're just trying to understand the concept of how we are in the middle of things, right? And so what it's going to do for us is going to show us how the system, the hierarchy system of thoughts, concepts, ideas, how that powers our brain, right? How it powers our brain. It's not necessarily the brain, though, right? So to get a little bit further into this concept of being in the middle, when we're trying to explain how our physical existence works, we zoom out and try to go into the stars. These fields of study, all of these, astronomy, astrology, biology, ecology, all of these different things, they're generally called macro or big science, right? So the study of the universe and all these kind of things, and then micro, which is the study of itty-bitty sciences, like microbiology or that kind of thing. To better understand the brain, we can use this micro realm and say thoughts are like cells in the body or atoms in the physical plane of existence. Much like cells in the body and atoms in the physical plane, thoughts are things, and they move, and they combine, and they get bigger, and they get bigger and bigger. And the way that they do that is you start with a thought, let's say that's a cell, and it gets bigger, and it goes bigger and bigger, and you get to a group of cells, and we'll get to that in just a second, called nerve cells in the brain. But from thoughts, you get groups of thoughts called ideas, right? And from groups of ideas, you get what's called concepts, right? And from concepts to understandings or beliefs, leading to perception and perspective. So we've gone all the way down in, and we've come all the way back out. Now, now that we have a good picture of what we're dealing with, so we're zooming all the way down into the brain, the physical brain. Let's see how that system, what that realm really looks like. Because a lot of times those different things, those different realms that you zoom into when you get into microbiology or you get into the macro world of astronomy, these kind of things, those things aren't the same as being in the middle, the present plane that we live in, right? So let's get into the brain and how it works, all right? So we talked about cells, right? So you have groups of cells called nerve cells in the brain. And nerve cells in the brain are called neurons, right? So neurons, these nerve cells, these nerve groups, they have these tiny branches that reach out and connect to other neurons, these other big groups of things, right? The way that these attach to each other, we'll get into in a little bit later, is called synapses. But the way that they reach out, these ganglia, these different arms, these different branches, they create what's called a neural net. And the way that a neural net actually works is called the law of associative memory. We're going to get just a little bit deeper into that. That's a really deep subject, law of associative memory. But Basically, a law of associative memory is ideas, thoughts, and concepts are all constructed and interconnected in this neural net. So, ideas, thoughts, and concepts are all constructed and interconstructed in this neural net. So, picture thoughts like droplets of water, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at that idea, okay, this network of neurons that are going from one to the other, and the way that they connect is synapses. And we're gonna talk about synapses way later on in the show, but it forms this big, huge neural net, and the way that neural net connects, the way that it works, is law of associative memory. So, to better understand the law of associative memory, let's use a metaphor. Let's use a way of looking at it. Okay, so let's picture each thought as a droplet of water, just one drop of water. All right. Now those drops or thoughts flow from each neuron or group of nerve cells, right? So they flow back and forth, right? So let's say you're thinking of the color blue, right? So that thought is going to flow just like water does. And that one thought is the color blue. And it has a lot. We're going to get into that a little bit as well. But just to keep it simple, remember just that one thought, one droplet flows, right? And then that one droplet turns into, let's say, a faucet, and then it gets more and more. Here's where the golden ticket of understanding comes in, okay? The more these drops flow from neuron to neuron, the more drops form, right? Now, the more drops form, the more water there is, and eventually the water starts flowing. Eventually we get from droplets to a trickle. And we might go from a trickle to a stream, and from a stream to a river. And eventually you can actually get from a river to a channel, right? Something that's the bottom of it, the riverbed or the channel bed, is very deep, right? But it's still a pathway, right? And that's what we're talking about, is neural pathways. So this stream or river is what's called a neural pathway. And much like a river, those thoughts that gathered together to make ideas, that gathered together to make concept, created these pathways or rivers of thought in our brains, right? So if you think about it in terms of the idea of color, or the idea of a microphone, what a microphone is for, like I have here, that one thought, right, which is identification of one thing. So when I say microphone, this is microphone. What it means to you and all those different things, that's where you get the law of associative memory. And that law of associative memory is much like a river or a pathway. It's a neural pathway. And it picks up a lot of different things, maybe feelings or emotions, all these different things as it goes along that neural pathway. Now that neural pathway is it happens very quickly, right? What I'm talking about might take, to get from one thought to another thought, might take, I don't know, I think there's about 15 billion. I've actually heard from different scientists that there are as many as 300 billion nerve cells in the human brain, and mapping out those pathways has amazing different combinations. But let's say we're continuing with this idea that, okay, so I said the word microphone, right? Well, from going from one nerve cell to the other might take all of a millisecond, but it might have to go through 100 different nerve cells to get to the idea of saying microphone, or associating microphone with what you want it to. This is where, when we talk about these neural pathways, you talk about these riverbeds and even channels. This is where you have habits. This is where you have addictions and negative emotions that become habits. This is where you have somewhat irregular word/feeling associations are all from these neural pathways. That's why they do those word associations when you go see a therapist or any of these people. So basically, the brain is a network of neural pathways, right? And it's going from these nerve cells and neurons one to the other, and it has all these branches that go from one to the other, and how they connect to each other is called synapses, and we're going to get into those here, I think, in the third section. But that's basically mapping out the brain. We haven't completely mapped out the brain. We can see where each thing functions. We can see the ideas of what thoughts are, what concepts are when it comes to those neural pathways and the synapses firing. So when we look at a brain, we can actually see those synapses firing in different areas of the brain, right? So that's kind of what the brain is. That's the general concept. So before we go to break, I want to ask this question. What do you think of when I say the word love? What's the first thing you think of? Perhaps you think of hearts or candy, maybe sex or marriage, family, friends. How about good old February 14th, right? Here's the real question. Why do you think of those things when you hear the word love? Law of associative memory. We're gonna come back to that. Ponder on that a little bit, and we'll be right back. And welcome back. So what do you think of when you hear the word love? Maybe it's not so much a thought as it is a feeling. Maybe it's something that you feel. Yes, this is where the mind comes into play. And first of all, let's look at a good definition for the mind. So if you look it up, you're going to come, especially if you Google it, this is what you'll get. It's a noun, and number one, it's the element of a person that enables them to be aware of the world and their experiences, to think and to feel, the faculty of consciousness and thought. Here's an example. As the thoughts ran through his mind, he came to a conclusion. The second part is a person's intellect, and an example of that is his keen mind. Now, the other examples that you're going to see, the other definitions are if you mind, hey, do you mind, that kind of thing. That's really not what we're talking about here. So we'll go ahead with that definition. And if that's our working definition, what exactly does it mean, though? So the mind is still somewhat a mysterious thing, okay, as opposed to the brain. The brain we're starting to map out, we're starting to understand a little bit as far as we as human beings and scientists. But the mind is a whole different thing. And that's why we can understand the brain, the organ, a lot better than we can understand the ghost in the machine, which happens to be the mind. We really haven't figured out how the mind works completely. So what we're going to do is we'll break down the given definition, and then I'll explain a little bit further. All right. So the element of a person that enables them to think, to feel. The faculty, which basically means inherent mental power, of consciousness and thought. Right? So that's where thought comes from, is the mind. The mind is the thing that thinks. It's consciousness. When we think of who are we, when we say the word I, there's a great philosopher by the name of Alan Watts. Not to be confused with the other person named Alan Watt. This is Alan Watts. He was a philosopher in the 60s and 70s. He was friends with Aldous Huxley and all these kind of people. Very interesting guy, very deep thinker. He talks about the idea of, what do you mean when you say I? Where does I? What is I? I think this is what we mean by I, is the mind. So the mind is really the thing that interprets data. I think that's what most people mean when they say, oh, he's a brainiac, or these kind of things. You're really trying to get to the mind. The mind is the thing. I think that's what we all think of as who we are, what we associate with. The mind interprets data, but also the mind is actually the spark of life as we know it, as far as consciousness and these kind of things. But where is the mind? That is the $64 trillion question. That's the hard one to pin down. Because when you look at a brain, it is very much, it fires, the synapses fire. We'll get into that in just a second. But you see the electricity. It's like electrical storm when you watch the brain actually work. But where does that electricity come from? So this is where you get into ideas of, is the sum larger than the sum total of the parts kind of idea. So is what you have much more than everything that you added up, right? And when it comes to the mind, it is. It's, the mind, how to pinpoint consciousness is very elusive. And really the mind has been it's been called the ghost in the machine because it's so elusive. It's hard to really pin down. And really what the mind is really it's its own realm, and it's called the metaphysical realm. I'll get into that at some point. Just as a little bit of a teaser, I'm going to do a whole entire podcast about the metaphysical realm, and we'll get into what the mind is and these kind of ideas. But just as a little teaser for that, thinking in terms of the 4 dimensions that we live in. So most people, we live in 3 dimensions, right? So you have up, down, forward, back, left, right, right? So that's your 3 dimensions, right? So you have forward, back, up, down, left, right. There's your 3 dimensions. So, but we really live in 4 dimensions. So what I just described is space, okay? But what we really live in is actually space and time. So we actually live in 4 dimensions. So we have the 3-dimensional, which is space, and then we have time, which is the 4th dimension. So you can think of the mind as the thing that bridges that gap between time and space. And we're going to get into a really deep question at the end of this section, but and it deals with the bridging of that gap, which is the interpretation of that gap, the interpretation between time and physical space. Now, it's true that time and physical space, you can go by, let's say, the sun, right? But you can't tell. I mean, you can go by the sun and growth and plants, these kind of things. But if you're in a dark cave, and that's why a lot of people have problems with isolation. A lot of blind people have a thing called, I think it's called non-24, where they can't interpret, is it today or is it yesterday or is it nighttime or daytime, right? So it's hard for them to exist in a society that runs off of all of those things. You can look at the mind as the thing that kind of bridges that gap. It tells you time and space, right? And how those two things are relative. But like I said, let's not get too deep into metaphysical realm right now. That's going to be a fun one. We're not going to do that now. We're going to have to save that for another show. But before we go to break, let me ask you this. Have you ever seen the movie Groundhog Day? Right? Bill Murray. I think Andy McDowell is her name. Here's the question. When you wake up each day, how do you know that a week hasn't elapsed? Which one is the one that tells you only 6 to 8 hours have gone by? Is it the brain or is it the mind? Think about it. And we'll be back right after this. And welcome back. So, did you put your mind to work thinking about the question posed before the break? I hope you did. It is an interesting question. One that actually leads to more questions. Which one is at work at any given time? The brain or the mind? Let's sum up how these two things are different and get to how they work in tandem with each other. So as we have seen, the brain is an organ. It collects data through the 5 senses. The mind interprets that data and provides the spark of thought within the engine that is the brain. You can think of the mind like the electricity, the thing that provides power to the machine. When we look at each nerve cell and how they interact with each other, we see what's called synapses, right? That's what I was alluding to earlier. So a synapsis is a junction between two nerve cells where impulses fire, much like lightning, right, from the sky to the earth. And the way that you can picture that, when lightning comes from the sky and it goes to the earth, it hits the earth, is very much like this synapsis fire from one nerve cell to another, right? Except it's multiple lightning strikes. It's a lot. I don't know how many. I don't know if anybody does, but it's a lot of lightning strikes, right? Another way to look at it is kind of like when you plug a cable that has like 4 or 5 prongs, right? And it plugs into another cable. So it's kind of that same idea, but the way that it happens is very much more like a lightning storm. Like I said, when we look at the brain and we watch the brain actually work in real time, it looks like a bunch of lightning storms are going on around in a clouded sky. It's very interesting to watch, actually. It's amazing. So that spark, that energy is created by the mind, and that spark is a thought, right? So each spark, each lightning bolt that comes from, it's a synapsis fire or impulse, is one thought, right? And then again, like we said, it goes all the way up and up and up and up into all the way into perception and perspective. But each thought, and this is where we get a little bit deeper, each thought carries many different things associated with it. All right, so let's understand that just a little bit deeper. Let's say you imagine a color. That idea is usually boiled down to one thought. So when I say the word color, you think of a color, perhaps maybe blue or yellow, right? Or perhaps you think in contrast in terms of color versus black and white. Now that thought, the idea of color, the thought of color, that usually carries many different things associated with it. That's why colors have feelings associated with them. So like blue is down, red has high energy, yellow is calm, blue's kind of mellow. Depends on who you're talking to. You also might have, let's say, memories associated with different colors. So let's say your dad always wore red. So you have that memory of your dad associated with a color. Actually, an interesting thought is one of my favorite guitar players, Jimi Hendrix, actually said that he saw music in color. So when he thought of a specific riff or a specific guitar lick or a specific sound, he would think of it in terms of color. So the way a lot of times he would write things down is he would write things down in terms of almost like a painting in his mind. It was amazing. Jimi Hendrix is an interesting guy, but the way that he thought was interesting as well, how he associated, right? So we said that the way the brain works is law of associative memory, right? So the way Jimi Hendrix understood music or certain notes, because he couldn't read music, he couldn't tell you, okay, so this is a D sharp, half diminished, blah blah blah. He didn't know how to do all that stuff. So the way that he understood it was, okay, this is a blues note, right? In blues, this is blue, so this is a happy note, so that's maybe yellow. So that's the way he understood things. That's the way he tried to get his thoughts across, maybe to a band member or a friend. So that one idea of saying color, saying just the word color, has so many different things that it carries along with it. And that's what the law of associative memory is. And this is the neural net. And so each thought has more thoughts attached to them. And these associative thoughts become bigger thoughts to form an idea and go on up the ladder, and it goes all the way back up to perception and perspective. So how does the brain and the mind work together to allow us to function the way that we do? So how does the brain and the mind work together to allow us to function the way that we do? Using our five senses and interpreting data to draw conclusions, sometimes in the matter of milliseconds. Almost instantaneous. So how these two things work together is really where the secret begins. The mind drives the body, and the brain is the engine of the body. The body absorbs data through 5 different senses: smell, touch, hearing, sight, and taste. That data gets put into the brain, kind of like a storage cabinet or a computer, right? The mind comes along and draws the correlations between that data. It gives the data meaning through the law of association, right? The mind tells the brain what to think, and the brain fires from one place to another, or one nerve cell to another, right? So we see that the brain is the physical companion to the mind. The mind is the driver, the brain is the machine. But the mind is much, much deeper than that. It's a whole other realm unto itself. But that's the basic idea of how those two things are trying to work together. How these two really work together is, to sum that up, is the brain has the data, the mind has the capacity to know what to do with the data, right? So it's like having a bunch of having a bunch of pictures in your computer, right? But what are you going to do with those pictures? I know we all have, thousands of pictures nowadays. But what do we do with those pictures? That's the real question. With either of these things, what's amazing about the mind and the brain and how they work together, they work off of each other. With either of these things, we can train the other. So the brain has the neural pathways of thought from the mind. The mind can close, open, or divert those thoughts if consciously aware of the thoughts that are flowing. Basically, we can change the data the mind receives, or we can change the flow the neural pathways receive. One affects the other, right? How this helps us is to retrain the brain, the mind, or both. Now, attitude of gratitude is a great way to retrain the brain's neural pathways. Right? By doing attitude of gratitude, every time we have that negative thought, right? You have to be conscious of the flow of thoughts through those neural pathways. We can stop the flow, much like a river. We can dam that flow and divert it. So every time we have that negative thought, we can stop that thought and divert it into something else. We can change or dry up that riverbed of negativity, right? How we can change the mind is meditation. So meditation is a great way to retrain the mind. So in meditation, you're closing off your senses. You're really trying to stop and lower your brain activity. And therefore your mind is not getting as much out of the senses. It's not getting as much input to deal with. And therefore you can retrain it. You can calm it down, retrain it, and allow those senses to not make connections to the mind and go in those different directions. So basically what that does is it allows you to slow that flow down in your mind. By slowing the input that comes in, you're slowing the flow of how fast your thoughts go. So much so that you can actually start diverting that and changing your neural pathways. That's really what meditation is actually for, is to slow down your brain or your mind and slow down all that synapses fire, neural net, all of these things, so that you can consciously recognize what is it I'm thinking right now, and then eventually start diverting those pathways into things that you want to think about. Retraining both or either can allow us to stop bad habits and create new beneficial ones. So, I hope that at some point, if you want to do that, if you have some bad habits, you have some new benefit thing. For me, I've started running. That's something I'm trying to train my body. Right now, my body says I don't want to do that, and my brain says we can't do this, and my mind says no, we're gonna do this. And so you're retraining your brain, retraining your body. That's the best way to get things done that you want to, is to be able to slow things down and consciously say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And your body will follow. Whatever the mind says, the body does. It has to. The problem is if you're not looking and thinking actively, then the body's going to tell you what to do all the time. Its body's going to say, okay, we're bored, let's eat. Okay, we're bored, let's, drink a beer, get, whatever. If you don't allow the mind to control the body will control the mind. Right? The brain will tell the mind what it needs. Right? And the brain will say, we're not stimulated enough. We need more stimulation. And so the mind will say, okay, well, let's turn on 5 different things. Let's watch a movie, let's play on our phone, let's have a video game going, let's talk to a friend. Let's do all these things all at the same time. If your body is in control of your mind, you can very easily figure that out, and how distracted you are, how focused you are. If your mind is in control of your body, right, you can very easily find that out, is how focused you are. Right? If you're having trouble focusing, then chances are it's because you've allowed your body to be more in control of your mind than your mind in control of your body. And basically where that comes from is if you're not thinking, you're not consciously, and I talked about this earlier in another episode, where if you're not exercising your mind, if you're not consciously thinking, it will start to atrophy. And so your body will start to take over, and it will tell the mind what to think. It'll tell it, okay, well, we need more food, we need more whatever, right? And so you become very carnal or corporeal, right? And because of that, once the mind says, wait a second, I don't like where I'm at, and your mind will feel trapped inside your body. And once you have that going on, your entire world will be like that, right? Because your mind is not happy with what's going on because it's not in control of anything. But once you allow the mind to take control of the body, once again, right, by doing simple things, by telling your body no, right? And the Bible, it talks about fasting, right? And that's to curb the body, to have the mind in control of the body. Once you get back to that point, right, your mind will start to feel better about its current situation, and say, okay, I'm in control of the body. I can do what it needs to be done. The body's going to tell me we want to eat chocolate and pizza every day, all day long. That's all we want to do, right? Like with me, it's sugar. I just want to drink, eat, sniff sugar if I could. It's very true. I love sugar, right? And I think all bodies love sugar. Tastes great, right? And it triggers something in your brain. Your brain says, we like this, right? The difference is your mind says, okay, that's great. And once your body is telling your mind, we need more sugar, we need more sugar, we need more sugar, and you go in that direction, now your body's controlling your mind. And your mind eventually will get to the point, it'll look around and say, I didn't want any of this. I didn't want, the big, gut I got. I didn't want this. I didn't want to be lethargic. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to drink, as much soda and sugary drinks as I do. I want to drink more water and these kind of things. And your body will actually start controlling your mind. You feel very bad because that idea of the mind being controlled by the body puts the mind almost in a cage. And when the mind feels caged, it feels trapped like that because it has no control over anything. It starts lashing out, and it can become a very vicious cycle. So if you have those bad habits, or you need to start creating new beneficial habits, it really all starts with the mind. The mind is the thing that drives things. Let's say you're having troubles with overeating, or eating too much, or binge eating, or whatever it may be. Try fasting. If you're having trouble with the way that you look, or the way that you feel every day. Let's say you're lethargic, or you have low energy. Try stopping something. Try regaining control over your body and telling your body consciously what to do. And also try some meditation. Try some of these ideas, this attitude of gratitude. All of these things, you see a lot of these in self-help, and it may be even sounding like I'm a self-help guru and all that stuff. I'm not a guru or guide or teacher or any of those things. I'm just a preacher. These things that I'm talking about, I've dealt with myself. And it's things that I've had to say, okay, so that's how this operates. This is how this operates. And it's one of the reasons I started running. Because I recognize, that's what makes you feel better, is physical exercise, for one. I love to sweat. I love sweating. Playing basketball, whatever that may be, but also telling your mind no, or telling your body no, we're not going to sit here all night and watch Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime. We're going to get up and we're going to go run. And, what's interesting about, I've fasted. I usually fast during specific feasts of the Lord. I'm going to do a whole episode about that, but usually that taking back control of your body with your mind, it will make you feel 100 times better. It really will. All of those things it's not necessarily self-help, that's just the truth of what's going on, right? It doesn't matter who says it. It could be Deepak Chopra or Ravi Sanka or whoever. That's just what we are dealing with, right? We're dealing with the body as a mechanized type of machine that has a ghost in the machine, which is the mind. And the mental realm, the metaphysical realm, is a whole nother thing we'll get into at some point. But just having the strength to do one thing and say, okay, every Thursday I'm not going to eat, right? And seeing how your body reacts to that, saying, hey, I'm not going to drink any more sodas, for the month of September, right? I'm not going to drink any sugar in my coffee anymore. Doing those little tiny things right there lets your body know who's in control, right? And it's not the five senses, it's not the carnal, it's the mental. It's your mind that says, no, I'm not going to eat that. I'm not going to do that. And once you get to that level of things, you start to feel better. You start to do things a little bit more, have a little bit more freedom in things, because you're not controlled. You're not a slave to just pleasure. Okay, well, I want to eat that. I want to drink that. I want to do this. I want to do that. You start to have things become a little bit more. Now things are more important because you're consciously, quite literally, choosing to do something. And now it means something, right? It means more. And it's a much better way to live. So in this episode, we have seen how the brain is an important organ, very important. Somewhat like a reflex muscle, you could say the brain is. And it responds to the data it collects until the mind tells it to do otherwise. We have seen how the mind and the brain work together to create, shape, and ultimately have, or be, the experience of life itself. We've also gone over a few ways to stop some bad habits and how to form some new ones. And if you're struggling with some of those, you'd like to change, try these methods, like I said. See if they work for you. What do you got to lose, right? Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope it has helped you see things a bit differently and given you hope. Please tune in to Wednesday's episode, airing at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. I hope that you are healthy, well-balanced, and working towards something, not just working at something. As always, and in all ways, may God bless you.